Welcome, everyone. We're going to call to order the work session for the Bountiful City Council for Tuesday, August 11th. We're excited that all of our tech is working. So today's topic is for our work session is going to be the South Davis Metro Fire District and some policy discussions and changes that are under consideration. So we're going to start with an overview by our city manager.
Thanks, Mayor. We're going to all jump in our Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody all the way back to 2004, actually a little bit before that, and start with a discussion of sort of the history of fire in Bountiful to the degree that I'm aware of it. So for most of its history, Bountiful had its own fire department. It went from a volunteer fire department to a full-time fire department. In 2004, and the years leading up to that, there was a lot of conversation about providing fire and EMS service in the rest of the county, southern part of the county. And Bountiful at that point in time had two stations. We had Station 81. I don't know if it was called Station 81 at the time. Jeff might know.
91 and 92.
Okay, 91 and 92. Basically the main station and the station up by the golf course. And Bountiful had just renovated the building down here, put about $3.2 million into that building. But there was a recognition that fire services might be better provided if there was a unification of South Davis Fire and Bountiful Fire. And at the time, there was a need to build an additional station by South Davis in Foxborough. And so the cities got together along with Davis County, unincorporated county, and created an interlocal agency that essentially melded together the two fire districts, or the fire department of Bountiful and the fire district. And it really was the intention, seemingly from the documents at the time, that ultimately it would become an independent taxing district, but there were a number of hurdles, policy hurdles that were of concern and couldn't be resolved immediately. And so it was created as an interlocal entity with its primary revenue source being assessments to the cities. So cities would allocate money in their general fund budgets, and that was provided to the district along with ambulance revenue to fund the services. It stayed that way for nearly 10 years. Conversations, as I understand it, came up over those years whether or not it was time to create an independent district. And we'll talk about the reasons why those weren't successful in a minute, but there were challenges created by the interlocal agency. The fact that it wasn't an independent taxing district had a couple of detriments. The biggest one was that it had no ability to finance debt. It had issued bonds with impact fees as a revenue source. At the time, the south end of the county was growing. This was pre-recession, and it was anticipated that the impact fees from the communities would pay for the new building that was built in Foxborough. But it wasn't a great interest rate, and nobody would look at refinancing our debt because we didn't have taxing authority. The second issue was more of a structural one, where every year there was, when it came time for the budget, and a discussion about how much money each city was willing to appropriate from its general fund. It was always the least financially willing community that sort of set the bar for what the budget would be. So if a community was really struggling to increase their assessment, then that's kind of where things ended. So as far as being able to address service level needs, I think it was a source of frustration for the fire district in particular to be able to do that. But it was also a concern for some of the communities that were maybe more willing to pay a higher assessment, but simply couldn't because they couldn't come to a consensus on what the needs were. And the district at the time had another, what I would call internal staffing problem, which was there really was no financial staff. The accountant for the district was a contract accountant with Keddington and Christensen, I think at the time, who helped provide their finances. So there wasn't a lot of expertise on the board either. So fast forward, we have the recession, and all of a sudden, all of that impact fee revenue that the other communities had been receiving to help pay the debt service of the district decreased dramatically. But we had no ability to refinance the debt. Nobody would look at that and give us a considerable, a reasonable rate. And cities were also at the same time beginning to have their own, having their own issues with revenues. Of course, sales tax was down, building fees were down, and so it became a stress on each member city too to allocate more money to the fire district. So the fire district was really trying to find a consistent, reliable revenue source in addition to assessments, and to help address some of the service level concerns that were being brought by the chief and the other communities, and to address some way to refinance the debt, which really we didn't have to pay as much for that debt if we could refinance, but there wasn't a mechanism for it. So come 2013, which is about the time I got to Bountiful, the conversations really kicked off again in earnest about creating a taxing entity rather than an interlocal entity. I'm going to pause there for just a minute and look at Richard, who I think was the only other member here at the time. Is there something that sort of set the stage that I'm forgetting?
I can't think of anything. Sorry, I should turn this on. I think that everything that you've laid down so far is the important points. Thank you.
So everybody recognized the problems, but the sticking point for creating a taxing district is sort of the historical problem with independent service districts. And I think it's really important, especially with our chief here, who I know and love and respect, that everybody know that this is not a reflection on any personnel at any service district. It's just really a structural function of service districts. Service districts that have a single service that they provide, whether that be sewer or waste management or fire, don't have the same level of competition for funds that a city does, where when we have revenue growth, we have to decide, is that going to go towards parks, or is that going to go towards police, or is that going to go towards roads? And so it's kind of a structural issue of service districts to just not be aware of competing needs. It's nobody's fault. It's not from a lack of competency or care. It's simply the structure doesn't exist to have that perspective. And so many cities and South End was no different. We're very reluctant to cede our taxing authority to a district that traditionally districts increase taxes without consideration for the other demands for people's dollars like a city do, if that makes sense. A related issue to that was that because Bountiful City's elected officials and every other city's elected officials everybody kind of knows where municipal services are provided. If there's a complaint about tax rates, they tend to go to cities first, whether or not you have a stake in that fight. And we all know that from concerns about the rec district or whatever they may be, that people tend to come to the city council first. So there was a lot of reluctance to give over the city's property tax authority, and I'm talking about Bountiful's, but everybody felt the same way, to an independent service district without some ability to have oversight into that. Another structural problem of the district, and again, this has nothing to do with personalities, it's just a reality, is that most independent service district boards are made up of not independently elected people, but representatives that are elected to their city councils. So we have a seat, every city has a seat, the county has a seat on South Davis. On one hand, it's great because there's a connection back to the city, but part of the challenge with that is that for many, that might be their third or fourth taxing entity that board that they're sitting on after their primary one, which is the city council, and after a full-time job. And so the ability at times of boards of directors of service districts to provide the level of oversight financially is hampered. That's not an across-the-board statement. Some people have more capacity than others do to do that, but as a trend, you see that in service districts. And so that was another big concern of Bountiful City and the other cities, is how do we ensure that if we're going to give up the financial oversight of Bountiful residents and give it to the district, how can the cities have continued influence over the development and execution of the budget beyond what we see in some of the other service districts? And at the time, the cities simply weren't willing to. That wasn't worth the trade-off, despite the challenges that we were seeing with financing the district. And then a final kind of concern for the cities had to do with, in Bountiful's case, our proportionate influence. So Bountiful was 44% of the taxable value of the district. We were the largest in terms of population, service call, assessment, and assessed valuation. And so it was really important to the council at the time that we have the ability to have the influence that was proportionate to the impact the district would have on our residents. When all the money was being allocated by the city council out of the general fund, the city council was involved every year in that decision. But without that assessment happening, the risk was that the council wouldn't have that level of influence in the budget anymore. And so that was a consideration. There were a number of issues that kept this from turning into a district. And then the last kind of hurdle was that in order to go from an independent district to, or an independent agency to, I should say, an interlocal agency to an independent district, every community that was involved had to agree. There was a state process that involved a public hearing, and if just one of the cities decided not to participate, the district couldn't be created. So it created a situation where we had to find compromises and solutions that benefited every single community and that everybody could sign off on. But it also provided Bountiful with a certain amount of leverage because we had needs at the time that we really wanted fulfilled. And in a minute, we'll talk about, let's see, I'll go over here and hopefully I can get this to, it's not going to work. We had needs that we were trying to get accomplished, and because the district couldn't be created without Bountiful's support, it gave us a certain amount of ability to create our expectations on what we wanted to protect Bountiful's interests. Let's see if I can get there. Well, we'll see. This will work, hopefully. So round about April 2013, all that information was kind of laid out for the city council. We checked back in with the city council, shared the concerns at the district, the concerns that Bountiful has, and then spent really the next 2 years between the cities trying to come up with a solution that was transparent, would meet the needs of all the cities, would also meet the needs of the district. And in May 2013, Chief Bassett and the city managers proposed a compromise that was unique to South Davis Metro Fire from any other service district that was included in your packet. And it included 4 protections for the cities from a potential of a district sort of having a lack of oversight. The first was to limit the district's purpose and to use property taxes only for debt service. A new building needed to be built in Centerville, so we needed to issue new debt in addition to refinancing the existing debt. Property tax could only be used for large capital expenses. And then there was a need to hire many new firefighters. And Chief, I can't remember how many we hired at that point in time. Do you happen to recall?
24 FTEs, full-time firefighters.
And we went from 2 people per apparatus to 3 people per apparatus. Is that right?
With the goal of 4 people per apparatus.
Yeah. I mean, it was a big change in the level of service, something that had been a safety concern for the chiefs for a long time. And initially, that was recommendation 1. Limit the district. We're only going to use property tax for those purposes. It's worth saying that since that time, that limit no longer exists. So that protection is kind of not there anymore. The second was to retain member assessments. And the reason for that was that too frequently we noticed with special service districts that the councils didn't pay nearly as much attention as the member that was serving on the board did. And by having a city council have to allocate money every year from your budget, it kept the councils at the table paying attention to what was going on with the growth of the district. The third issue had to do with starting with a small tax levy. Had all of the district's funds budget been funded by a property tax increase initially, it would have meant we would have been required by state law to reduce our property tax rate by the same amount. Our contribution to the fire district at the time was just shy of $2 million, and I think our property tax revenue was about $2 million. It would have basically completely taken away any property tax revenue Bountiful would have received. Would have done something similar for most other cities. So the idea was that we're going to begin with a small tax levy, and then the fire district itself is going to have to justify tax increases over the years to increase the tax rate to the point where it could be either self-sustaining or complementary to the assessments. And then the final and really the biggest compromise or idea at the time was to involve the city managers in the budget process. State law specifies that a budget is to be prepared by a budget officer. And the idea was, well, I'll back up just a little bit. Back in 2012, the mayors on the board of directors had asked the city managers to get more involved with the chief in the development of the budget. So there was kind of an informal review going on. The advantage of that review was that right from the beginning of the budget process of the district, you had the budget officer of the district, the chief, along with the budget officers of each of the cities, who were all intimately familiar with their own financial positions, and we could start the budget process of the district by helping the chief understand what our finances were looking like year to date and have direct influence on how much the assessment would grow, rather than being told after the development of a tentative budget how much our percentage was going to be. That's been a really, really important part. The second part that's important to that is that the administrative committee is made up of all of the cities. So nobody was left off or left away from the table. Every city's focus got to be heard. Those were the compromises that were made. And so what ended up happening is June, there was another work session with the council. August, the council held another meeting, adopted a resolution that started the process. We had public hearings. Every city had to have a public hearing in September. And then come December, each city adopted a resolution creating the district, and the district started in 2016. Since that time, the district has evolved. Things have changed. The district has, we've talked about, has hired additional firefighters. Over time, the board has decided, with the input of the city managers, to not limit the property tax to just those original purposes. Part of that is because it was frustrating for some cities that weren't seeing as much growth to have to go through truth in taxation just to pay their assessment while the district was also going through truth in taxation. That happened this year to Centerville. And then the fire district also brought on full-time staff to help with finances. And, but we continued to roll along. But there was a certain amount of tension that's created by having the administrative committee and the board of directors. And so I think it's important to recognize that tension was, hopefully I've been able to demonstrate, was intentional. It was never inappropriate or unprofessional, but it created a burden for the chief, certainly, to have to work with the administrative committee to develop the budget and then have it go to the board of directors, the elected officials, for approval. And the biggest problem, in my opinion, with the administrative committee was the fact that the chair of that committee changed basically every year. So one year, the chief might have to work with me in the way I like looking at budgets, and the next year he's going to work with Ken from North Salt Lake, the way he likes budgets, and so it created some stress for the chiefs that the budget process kind of changed a little bit each year, and that's a reasonable concern. So something that I think we all recognize needed to be looked at. What I'd kind of like to do from here is, so right now we're in a position where the board of directors has created a task force subcommittee work group. Mayor and I couldn't decide if there's an official name or not, who's looking at the role of the administrative committee that came out of interviews that were done after Chief Greg Stewart passed away. And they are investigating right now what the role of the administrative committee should be. What I'm hoping to do tonight is kind of point out, taking a cue from our, if you remember, the conflict resolution classes that we took at the League of Cities and Towns. I want to pull back from positions or outcomes and talk more about what are the interests that the fire district has with regards to the administrative committee and their finances, and what are the interests that Bountiful City and the other cities have, and where do those interests overlap, and are they still, especially the city ones, are they still important to the city council? Because if they're not, then that definitely can help inform the mayor and me in our conversations moving forward. If they are, then that also informs, I think, how we move forward with the role of the administrative committee. I'm going to need the mayor's help a little bit because she's been involved with the subcommittee. But as I tried to think of there are a lot of interests at the fire district, but with regards to finance, I think these are the two reasons that the administrative committee is being looked at right now. And the first is to make sure that current and future staff, and at the time there was concern about hiring a replacement for chief, that if somebody looked at the governance structure of the district and was like, well, I don't want to be involved in that, was that going to be a problem? Fortunately, we got a great guy as chief, so but we want to make sure that I think one of the concerns that the district has is our governance structure so strange that it's going to dissuade people from wanting to work at South Davis Metro. And then, of course, the other main interest that staff at South Davis have is sufficient, reliable funding to meet service level demands. We've talked about it in our budget meetings. It's hard for a service district like the fire district to not have any revenue source that grows. We have sales tax that grows. Property tax doesn't grow by itself. Ambulance revenue doesn't grow by itself. And so it's a constant pressure by the district to have sufficient to meet growing service level costs and meet service level demands. So reliable revenue structure is important. I'm going to pause there before we go to the city interest. Mayor, what would you add to that you have seen as interests from South Davis?
So as the council is aware, we've had sometimes some individual discussions with each of you, and as I've given council reports and updates, after the passing of Chief Stewart, Mayor Ryan Westergaard of Woods Cross and I were tasked with an interesting assignment. And kind of broadly, that assignment was to examine the organization or operational issues or challenges that may have contributed to Chief Stewart's death, to ensure that if there were issues or challenges that our subcommittee identified, that they were addressed so that a future South Davis Metro Fire Chief would be set up for success, and the district would be set up for success, and our residents would continue to have the great fire and emergency services that they expect. There was also, part of the assignment was to ensure that the firefighters were appropriately supported by the board and the organizational structure and the command leadership. I know you all aware that there were things we wanted to make sure that the firefighters felt really supported in terms of their peer support and their professional support. And that we wanted to make sure that the fire service area residents were receiving appropriate, cost-effective, and responsive emergency services. So this was kind of a broad assignment. It took us into a number of different interviews with a number of different people inside our 5-city area, inside the fire district, and externally. And so it brought us in contact with other special service districts, other professional firefighting associations like the State Chiefs Association and the Western Fire Chiefs Association. And all of these people, I want to just emphasize, were incredibly generous with their time. We came back to some of them multiple times with additional questions and sought additional feedback to know and understand better. And from that, we brought a handful of recommendations back to the fire board. Some of those were recommendations that we discussed in open public meetings, and some of them, given that they went to character and competency, were in closed session discussions. Some of those were about how to go about hiring a new fire chief. That task and that recommendation has been acted on by the board, and we have, and you've all met, our new fire chief. One of those recommendations did relate to something that came up in a couple different ways and instances, which was our unique structure with the admin committee. And that structure came up internally, and it was raised as by parties outside as being a factor that was known about our fire district as being a kind of a unique quirk with a unique governance model, and that that quirk was something that firefighters saw as being a challenge, and therefore there was some feedback that it had limited prior hiring pools and may limit us in the future. And then it came up as feedback from inside the district as well as being something that was, I think our city manager has appropriately described it as the system was set up with intentional tension. And we set up a lot of systems with intentional tension. Our 3 branches of government are set up with intentional tension. Powers of cities versus counties versus the state are set up with intentional tension. And some of that holds systems in check and in balance. But we all have experience with systems where we feel like one side of a system set up of tension can become overbalanced or is flexing too hard, and the balance is, the system no longer sits in a balance held by the tension and feels lopsided or challenging. So there were some of those instances that were raised, and they were broad enough that one of the recommendations was to dive deeper into the organizational structure and the administrative committee. The bylaws that were created out of the process that city manager has described, that get us to the December 2015 creation with taxing authority, set up a board of directors, and they set up an administrative committee, and in the bylaws, the administrative committee is set up to be an advisory body, but it's also given this power to have this rotating budget officer. And as we asked a lot of questions of other agencies and of these organizations that touch all agencies in the state and in the western United States, we really couldn't find one that had been set up in really the same way. And so that created a recommendation and then a further direction from the full fire board to create a group that would then start to ask some of those questions about, as you watch the evolution from an interlocal agency to a special district, is there a next evolution? Is this an iterative process where we're learning and changing and growing? And so the group has been looking at that and preparing some recommendations and considerations about how to make sure that there's clarity in roles and authorities, and whether to consider with the growth of the professional administrative staff that the fire district, that the tension of the rotating budget officer in particular, if that one has become overbalanced, and with the growth of internal staff where we went from a contract outside accounting firm to two individuals with backgrounds and degrees that match what we would see in our cities, if it's time for some of that to shift. So I'll also pause there in case anyone has any questions or additional feedback.
I've got a couple of questions if I could, Mayor. I don't know who might know the answer to this question, but what is Bountiful's percentage of the assessed value of the district now?
We're about 36%.
Okay. And Mayor, the special committee, what should I call it, that you sat on?
I don't know that it has an official name. We've not named it, but it could be a work group, it could be a committee, it could be a subcommittee.
So a committee that doesn't have a name, that's another special circumstance, right?
Sorry, say that again?
A committee without a name, isn't that another special circumstance?
Yeah.
Every committee should have a name. So just the idea that I wanted to share is that Bountiful benefits from a whole bunch of special arrangements that are kind of unicorns in their own field, including our landfill and our hydro generation and our fiber network. I mean, how many cities would love to have our unique situation with our fiber network? I don't think that because the administrative committee is a unique or an unusual setup doesn't mean that it doesn't still have value. Do you feel like our system is out of balance, power favoring the administrative committee now?
I do, after the time that I have spent because of the special committee assignment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like some of the feedback is that there are ways that it can evolve where you can continue to gain and to take advantage of the amazing depth of experience, especially from a financial perspective of the city managers. We're all familiar and are aware of Gary's depth of city municipal knowledge and financing knowledge and engagement, and there is a value in that, times 5 other people, by being able to tap into Bryce Hatterley and Ken Leatham and Brant Hansen, and there is a lot of value that they bring. And I would point to a really great example. This is the first year of a new truth in taxation system. We all didn't get to experience it as a Bountiful City group because we didn't go through that process.
Right.
The state legislature resisted the suggestion that there should be a delayed implementation. So we built this system as cities were in budget process.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they were utilizing this process, they would have to go through a first of its kind building out of checklists and guidelines as it was all happening. And the fire district did go through a truth in taxation hearing that took place last week. Some of you attended. And the checklist, the timelines, the noticing provisions, the impact statement, because they were all new and because nobody wanted to miss a step, there were lots of conversations between Jessica Hardy, who is charged internally with that budget preparation and management and noticing, and Bryce Hatterley, who some of you may know, but some of you may not know, who is the Woods Cross city manager, and of course Gary. Gary and I got to spend a lot of time at the state capitol helping negotiate that property tax bill. And so, you know, Gary had a lot of insight to offer on at least what we interpreted the legislative intent of that impact statement to be, since these were all going to be first true tests of that system. So there is benefit and there is value. Where I think the challenge is, where the tension may feel like it's feeling a little bit lopsided, is that you are rotating it on this yearly basis. We are all really able to articulate what Bountiful's financial philosophy it is, right? We're a pay-as-you-go city. How many times have we all said that in various meetings?
Yeah.
And as we've articulated that policies, if we have articulated what's important to us in a reserve policy, as we've articulated how we're benchmarking staff and compensation, you know, we have a Bountiful philosophy and mentality that we've been able to articulate as elected officials and staff for years and years and years. Our sister cities are not necessarily in that same mode,
Right.
and they may not necessarily be in the same financial position. And so at each click of the calendar, that different flavor and emphasis comes out in the city manager whose turn it is to serve as that rotating budget officer.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that as we all know, start of the calendar year is also the start of the fiscal year. So you start a new philosophy at the same time you start your most important budgeting. And so as you go through learning and meshing, it's, as I was explaining to the high school mountain bike team today, as we're working on race starts, you grind those gears as you're shifting through, and sometimes that works great, sometimes the chain falls off.
Yeah,
That was a really long answer to your question.
it's okay. We've got all day. So the next question is, as you take off your South Davis Metro firefighter helmet and respirator and put on your Bountiful City hat,
They have not issued me a respirator. Did
Oh,
get a
chief.
helmet. I'm not sure if it's, you know.
I'll have one here before the end of the
okay. What do you say to Bountiful residents that they're getting in exchange for giving up the protections that the administrative committee have provided, that were absolute necessities, because I was there and voted on both of the last issues, that were absolute necessities in the last two votes that had to be unanimous across all cities? What are they getting in exchange?
Well, I think one of the things that I would suggest to those voters, one, as you look at the budget now, you know, the assessment across all the cities, of the 22 million that make up the fire district budget, about $8 million comes from the assessment, 14 million comes from property tax, ambulances, the other revenue sources. So the balance is coming from some other places. It's still a significant dollar amount. I'm not going to diminish that 8 out of 22 isn't serious. Chiefs are very important to the leadership of the structure. They're also, you know, the most significant FTE on the payroll. And one of the things that was identified by Mayor Westergaard and myself in our reports was that we seem to be churning through this highest and most important CEO of fire position at a really rapid clip. And that's not a great value to our taxpayers, and it's not very efficient as well. And so that's a balance to be considered.
Sure. What, a wild guess for me, what percentage of the chief's stress is the administrative committee?
That may be one that we defer to the actual chiefs to answer, but it was, as we met with past chiefs that are still living, it was something that that three in that interview process brought up as being something that they cited as contributing to the part of the stress of their decision to retire when they chose to retire.
Okay, last question and comment, and I'm sorry that I've taken so much time. We all recognize the unspeakable tragedy that happened in our fire district, and I in no way want to minimize that. But I feel like there was a feeling at the start of this process that we have to do something, and that in the end, Bountiful residents will lose some protections that they currently have because of the fact that the feeling is we have to do something, even if that something isn't necessarily going to provide the relief that it's hoped it will provide. So that's my statement. And I appreciate your work on it. I sincerely wish that our city manager had been afforded an opportunity as someone who has also been there in some of the important decision-making times to be part of the, as heretofore unnamed committee as it did its work. But thanks for your time.
Thanks. As you know, I always am deeply interested in your thoughts and in your feedback. I think my response on that comment would be when I took on this assignment with Mayor Westergaard, I did not know where it would lead us. I had some thoughts that it would probably lead us, and it has inspired, to be frank, an interest in me in peer support and in mental health for people who have very difficult and challenging jobs, because we're aware that there have been other challenges in that space at the fire district. And so if I had a predetermined thought of this will lead me towards a certain spot on a map, that's where I thought, honestly, we would end up going. And it has inspired an interest there, and something that I feel is something we probably aren't talking about enough, aren't doing enough about. Both of our chiefs have been gracious to talk with me about this topic a lot because it has become something I want to make sure we get right. But if there was an effort to make sure that we did something to show that we did something, I think I would have ended up in that space, but it wasn't the only space that the interviews and the experience led me to.
So council, in the last 10 to 13 minutes we have, just draw your attention to the last slide. These are the interests, these are the whys that we were trying to solve when we created the district 10 years ago, with regards to the compromise. And so what I'd like to do is get some feedback from you all as to, do these whys, are they still relevant today to you? The city council, this was such a big policy decision for each of the city councils 10 years ago that it felt appropriate to get you up to speed on what was happening and to get your thoughts about whether or not these things are still of interest to you. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. which is why I'm talking interests as opposed to, this is what ought to happen, but would love to know your thoughts. These were the interests. We want to enjoy the economies of scale of a regional service, but maintain some meaningful influence over the district's finances. We wanted to ensure each city's financial position and needs were considered in the development of the budget, not just during its consideration by the board. We were trying to incentivize a meaningful connection between each member's city council and the district, keep the councils engaged. And then to build a governance structure that protects Bountiful beyond today's leaders. Regardless of the personalities, that there would be a structure in place that could protect Bountiful and our financial interests. So, question for the council and discussion is, tell me your thoughts about those interests, and if they're still interests, or if there are additional interests that you think we need to be considerate of.
I was going to say, I think we'd love to hear from, you've heard from me, and we've heard a little bit from Councilmember Higginson, so are there any feedback from others?
Thanks for characterizing it as a little bit from Councilman Higginson.
And there's a little bit from the mayor, too, so I think we've covered ourselves.
Okay.
I can go. I would say,
Let me jump in first.
of course.
Mayor, my comment about having a hope of a predetermined outcome was not the least bit meant as an accusation towards any individual. I should clarify that. I wasn't trying to attack you or any other member that served on that board. It was just, it's just been kind of a feeling. So please don't take that as an attack on you. And now I'll be quiet so Max can talk. Sorry.
I say the interests are still there. I wouldn't say that there's anything there that would jump out as a change. I would think more the application of how the protection is made would be reviewed by the board, in the sense of, I put myself in the business world that I'm in, and it would be hard for a CEO to serve two masters. One, just answering to the board on budgets and scale and that, and also turning around and having similar mandates from the financial side of the company. That would be very hard, a lot of weight to carry both. But I do see a need for, or a way for the administrative council to still be a part of the discussion, but be more behind the scenes, working with the financial representatives that the fire department has now hired. So have that be the continuity between the board and the administrative, is have those people be the representative. And then I do look at the rec district. Bountiful City for 3 years now has had the same financial influence in that. So there's continuity there where it's not a change of personnel and not a change of mindset, or that it's been consistent. And I think that's helped the rec district get to a good spot where it's at now. So again, think that there's still ways to protect this interest that we're mentioning here for Bountiful City, just applied differently and aligned differently between the two.
Any other feedback?
I have a question. So is this discussion happening with every council in the fire districts?
I don't know. This, one of the unique things about this is that the bylaws had to be created and approved by every city council, but now that the district's created, it's entirely up to the board to make changes. So I don't know if other cities are having conversations about this.
Okay, so in a way, this is very nice for us to be brought in on the discussion, and we appreciate that. And I appreciate understanding the history. I appreciate the broad, deep dive into the current situation. I really appreciate the depth that you've gone to on this. I think I feel similar to to Councilor Member Murray, in that yes, these things are of interest. This is very important, especially the use. We're spending our tax dollars. We want to protect our citizens as much as we can. With all the unicorns that Bountiful does have, is there a way that we could take off the greatest strain of having that budget officer? What it sounded to me was the budget officer changing every year. Could we create something new that maybe that's not happening, and yet the city managers are still key players in creating the budget? That's my question. I know you can't answer that right now, but yes, important, but yes, important. I can't imagine trying to change my way of doing things every single year.
So I've served on that administrative committee for 10 years, and I've had my chance to be the budget officer, and also the chance to listen to the other budget officers present the budget and us work through the different philosophies, and it's always worked. But I do think there are a couple of meaningful things, in my opinion. The first is I think it's really important that every city be represented every year on that administrative committee, so that because I can't imagine a situation, for example, where Bountiful wouldn't have a role for a year or two because we've rotated off in light of how much energy we've spent on trying to make sure we had proportionate interest. And the other idea is I really like the idea of a rotating chair. I'm not sure that having the budget committee be the budget officers all that important. That was unique and is a unicorn. But I think having all of the city managers represented every year and then having a chair that maybe serves for 3 years. We take a model, and I mentioned it in my staff report. You know, the Handcart Days does something that is, I think, pretty unique but works pretty well, is you have a 3-year assignment as the chairs of that committee. And year 1, you're learning from the last chairs. Year 2, you're in charge. And year 3, you're training your replacement. And it provides a lot of that continuity. So the second one's an idea, but the first one I think is of everyone being represented every year, I think is pretty important still. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any additional? I agree. Thank you for all of this, and thank you for all of the context. And thanks, Chief, for being here. I'm also of the opinion with Council Member Murray and Child. In some ways, it feels, with having the board and the administrative committee 20 years later, it feels like doubling efforts. And I would think that every city is represented by every board member, since there is a representative from every city serving on the board. Is that correct? But with different understandings of city operations. I mean, that's correct. That's the distinction. Then I would think those elected officials, the onus would be on them if they have serious financial, budgetary questions, to either work with the fire district directly or go to their city manager or whomever, or their finance officer within their city to do some due diligence on their end. It almost feels like, and again, I have not sat on the board, I've only been to a few meetings, but it feels like a bit of a, I don't know, I feel like the onus should be more on the elected official who is elected by the residents to oversee the way tax dollars are being spent, rather than city employees whose knowledge and depth and breadth of understanding is more than I will ever know. But I do feel like it just feels like a bit of a doubling effort.
Can I ask maybe a clarifying question?
Yeah, please.
with the city's budget process, how does that differ? I mean, we, essentially, it's the same process.
I would agree,
Staff is preparing the budget,
100%.
and then it's the board that reviews and approves, so.
I would agree. My only counter to that would be of all of the, if that model needed to stand, of all of the taxing entities in the district, the fire district is the only one that has city managers with a significant role, for better or for worse. So I do think, yes, we have these fabulous, Bountiful is an odd duck in a lot of ways, but I wear that with pride because we are pay-as-you-go. And I'm not calling for the sake of change for change. I never think that is good. I would hope that we could really, when our comments are taken back to the board, my comment would be, is the need really there? And we might argue that it is, or should more of the burden be placed on the elected officials and relying on the budget officers that are there already as full-time employees? If we're talking about continuity, they're there. Are we relying on them? And if there's cross-checking, or if we need to work with our, if those board members need to discuss those budgets with their finance directors within their cities or their city managers, I'm not discounting that knowledge or wisdom. It's just, from what has been presented and my understanding, it feels like doubling efforts. So I don't know if there's any insight, but that's, to quote Richard, but that's just me.
I'm going to ask the indulgence of our audience, because I want to make sure we get
I apologize.
feedback from Councilmember Bell on this topic, and I don't want to cut him off. So we will just keep going for just a little bit longer and just delay the start of council meeting just a little bit. So we'll now move over, unless, did you have any other?
No.
Okay, we'll,
Thank you, Mayor. I was about to ask if I had a minute.
you can take as much time as you want to articulate your thoughts. It's an important topic.
So I do want to start with a thank you for all the effort to our city manager and whoever else helped pull this together. The structure that we've had has certainly served us well for a lot of years, and I'm grateful for it. And so that's a real positive. I think, as I think through that, I recognize as city council, we might have a little bit of influence in terms of bending the mayor's ear, who's on that board, and recognize we don't fully, if all the other cities aren't even starting to engage in this. So thank you, Mayor, for letting us comment and hear our words. But I do think, and just kind of some raw thoughts here, I certainly support those items still that are on the board, so that's a given. I do agree with Councilman Higginson that it would be really important before a lot of steps are taken to have that list of what we gain and what we lose by pursuing whatever path if we deviate from where we're at. That is really important, given that it has served us well. On the other hand, there's some real, feels like some structural issues that need to be addressed. And the district has definitely grown in terms of their maturity, their ability to do more. I have some real questions about how high that level is, because I just don't know, their sophistication financially, what role they can play, between whether that's budget officer type stuff or whatever that is. And I don't know that I understand that, but I have questions and their desire to be part of that, because that's certainly important. But I'm open to looking, but if I were in the mayor's spot, I'd be open to looking, and on that board, I'd be open to looking at what we can do to change, but be very quick to make sure we really realize what we're losing and how we can, what we can do to help make this better. But I did read your, some of the suggestions, and I do have one overlying thought, I guess, about that, and that is, there's pluses and minuses with all of these things. I was thinking about the 3-year rotation. You know, a minus would be to that is if we got a manager, a city manager who was not as engaged in that process. And that's a 3-year, and it's heavy. It could be a heavy assignment for 3 years. That's a long period of time to commit. So the rotation has problems. I'm also worried on the flip side. When you have an executive, the board, who's has more time and there's very robust, it works very well to change the structure where all the reporting goes through them, perhaps. What happens when it's not so robust? The executives they don't have the time. So the structure that we come up with has to accommodate more than this current version of the board, is my view. It has to accommodate the next version too, just like the last structure will last for 10 years. And so I guess I look at all those things, and I think that board, quite frankly, Mayor, is fabulous. It is there, very engaged, really, really grateful for what they're doing. But I also recognize boards that follow may not be quite executive, that robust and capable. So anyway, that's a lot of both ways, but those are just initial reactions to a new topic to me. But thank you for listening.
Well, Council, thanks, and Mayor, for the opportunity to have the conversation. This was such a big deal 10 years ago. It seemed appropriate that this council will get a chance to share their thoughts too. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We've gone just a little bit over our work session time. Thanks to the public for kind of indulging us and finishing out that conversation. As you all know, I'm always happy to chat, give additional insight or feedback, or hear your perspectives. I know the city manager is as well, so we'll keep everybody up to speed. We have kind of run out of time to hear from our fire chief tonight. I'll just end by saying I have really appreciated getting to know and work with him. These aren't easy assignments or roles that we ask anyone to take on, whether it's city manager or chief or department head. They come with really big and weighty responsibilities, and so we've hired some really great people to do all these jobs and be part of our immediate Team Bountiful and are part of greater Team Bountiful. And I'm confident that we'll continue to do that because we all value this place we call home and the people that we're here to serve. So with that, we are going to take the briefest of breaks so that Miranda can reset our Zoom feed to the regularly scheduled council meeting, and we'll switch gears to that agenda. Thanks.